I didn't know I was going to find my way to this resolution when I set out to tell this story today. All I knew when I started was that I would talk about my history with California in some way. But that's the power of stories told from the heart. That's the power of our stories when we get out of their way, when we surrender to them and let them tell themselves through us. When we do that, our stories become as much for us as they are for our listeners or readers. And we, the storytellers, learn as much from them, often about ourselves, as do our listeners and readers. So what story can you tell today from the heart? Or better put, what story of yours can you allow to tell itself through you? What story of yours can you surrender to? What story of yours can you allow to reveal itself to you? To reveal you to you. Whatever that story is, tell it, share it, grow into it, grow from it, and be grateful to it. That's just a taste of the full story. My story, but also yours.